If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's the weirdest thing you've ever witnessed, out in the wild, or small towns, or deep in the woods, etc., that you can't explain to this day? Me, my brother, and a friend were camping once when I was maybe 11 or 12 way out on our 100-acre farm in small town Kentucky. I woke up around 1:30 or so in the morning and could faintly hear a piano being played that sounded like it was coming out of the woods about 100 yards from our campsite. There is not a house or building or anything anywhere near that spot on our farm. So naturally I think I'm just hearing things and decide to try to go back to sleep. Then my brother, who was apparently also awake, sits up and asks me if I hear a piano. We made a dash for the house and never camped out there again. I was in the Boy Scouts when I was younger. The summer of '97 we were on our way back from a campout. Our modest troop was in a 15-passenger van with a tow-behind trailer. I was in the middle seat sitting up on my knees talking to the person sitting behind me, my cousin, when all of a sudden he just fell asleep as well as the two kids sitting next to him. I looked down at the kid sitting next to me and he was also asleep. Then the van was upside down and I was thrown to the ceiling. It was right side up again and I was slammed back into the seat, and lastly it was upside down again and this time it hit hard. I had glass in my mouth and felt like every bone in my body was broken, but I sat up after a minute and watched someone crawl out through the window, so I followed them. When I got out I was in ankle-deep water. We had landed in a ditch at the base of a hill that the road was on. I couldn't see the person I had followed out of the wreckage. I climbed the hill, losing my shoe in the process, and stood in 70 miles per hour traffic and two cars slammed on their brakes to avoid me. A woman stepped out of the first car and was screaming her head off at me before she realized I was all tore up and there was a van in the ditch. Then she immediately ran back to her car and pulled out a car phone. Later at the hospital, numerous doctors and nurses asked me to repeat this story over and over and over again. I had to tell this story. It wasn't until later that I found out everyone else was trapped in the van with broken bones and one kid died. I was the only person who escaped of my own power and I didn't have a scratch on me. I still don't know who or what it was I followed out of the broken window. Late at night in the summertime a few years back, me, my sister and my brother were gravel traveling through the back roads of SW, Iowa. We were drinking a little and having a good time until we came to this stop sign 4-way intersection surrounded by cornfields in all directions. Then my sister screams. I jump in my seat cause she was so loud and I ask what the hell was wrong with her. She tells me there's a swing set outside. I look around for a second trying to focus in the dark shadows and I see it. It was rusty and very old. We all were freaking out at this point cause who the fuck leaves a swing set in the ditch at an intersection? Then the creepy part happened. It started moving. Some of you must suggest that's not a big deal cause of the wind, but I am absolutely certain there was no wind that night. Still as can be. We even rolled down our windows to check. Also, one of the two swings was swinging much more than the other one. I told my sister to get the fuck out of there and she stepped on the gas. We never went gravel traveling at night again. I still get uneasy when I remember that summer night years ago. I worked at my college's bowling alley for 4 years. One day, we had a Chinese student with a heavy accent come in, get shoes, and start bowling. He would react to every one of his tosses. Gutter ball up to strike number 7. Complete with a little dance. Yes, he kept count of his strikes throughout the night but seemingly paid no attention to his score for each game for those curious. At one point he shouted, "I love bowling." And one of my coworkers fell out of his chair laughing. He stayed for hours and was apparently having the time of his life. I didn't mention, but this was also our weekly free pizza night, complete with red pin bowling, which got him even more excited. When he was done, he returned his shoes, collected his student ID, declared "I'll be back tomorrow," excitedly, and left. We never saw him again. Thus concludes the legend of Super Happy Bowling Guy. We don't know who he was, what happened to him, or why he never returned. There are a couple of times where I saw ghosts as a kid. I just put it down to both being very perceptive and imaginative at the same time. The only time it's happened to me as an adult was last year on an overnight hike over a mountain, where I camped for the night as an emergency shelter with a few other campers around. A bad storm hits and blows my tent over at 4 a.m. Everyone else huddles in the emergency shelter, but me, being a complete idiot, decide to get an early start on the day and hike back to civilization. The weather got worse. A lot worse. I'm talking stinging ice falling from the sky and gusts of wind strong enough to knock me to the ground like I was tackled. The ground is pretty much barren, but there is a cluster of stunted trees and a small dip which provide a bit of shelter. As I approach, I begin to hear voices. A man and a young girl's voice. I can't quite pick out the words, but I can hear them enough to pick the gender and age. they sound sad but not distressed or anything. As I get closer, the voices become clearer until I reach a small clearing with an abandoned campsite and there are no voices. I call out to them for a while, shouting for help and asking if anyone is there, but there is only silence. I explore the area and there is no one there. Eventually I have to keep going, and as I leave there are the same voices again, getting fainter as I leave the clearing. Eventually I come stumbling down the mountain and have helpful strangers ask if I'm okay and offer me food. Smile, lol, I guess I looked half dead at the time. I have hypothermia but a day's rest in bed and I'm back to good health. It still strikes me how creepy that little clearing was and how the voices got louder the closer you got but then vanished when you were there. Despite the fact that it was a bit sheltered from the weather, I did not want to stick around that little area. Place gave me the heebie-jeebies. Absolute oddest thing that ever happened to me that I think would have been a delusion if I hadn't been with someone at the time. It was around 1998 to 1999. I was with a high school group and we were attending a conference of some sort at Portland State University. Our teacher had split us up into groups of 2 and we were assigned different presentations we were supposed to go see. We got our list of presentations and the time they were being held and sent on our way. Me and my classmate Jacob were to go to the 2nd or 3rd floor to go see a talk on invasive species in Oregon, so we looked at the map and found the room we were supposed to go to. We decided to take the elevator since we were both lazy and wanted to avoid the crowd on the stairs. So we get in the elevator, go up to, I forget if it was the 2nd or 3rd floor. I believe the 3rd, as I think we started out on the 2nd floor. Once we got off we were definitely in the same building, but everything seemed duller and there was no one anywhere. The entire place looked like it was from the 60s or something. Nothing had been updated and there were entire areas blocked off and taped up and dusty. All the doors leading out of the small area we were at when we got off the elevator were locked and the windows were black. We couldn't tell if there was black paper taped over the windows or not, but we couldn't see anything through the windows on the doors. Looking out the windows onto the street we saw cars but no people anywhere. Keep in mind this is in the middle of Portland, Oregon, so there should be hippies all over the place, but not a soul was seen. I finally found a door that was open and went through, but the whole building seemed to be abandoned, so I went back to the elevator and met Jacob, who hadn't seen anything more than I did. At the time there was several hundred people at PSU for this conference, so the 3rd floor should be buzzing with activity, but we saw, nor heard a soul. You couldn't even hear the activity downstairs. Jacob had a very uneasy feeling and I agreed we should probably go back downstairs. So we got back on the elevator and got off on the 2nd floor where we came from, IIRC, and we were back, bright lights, a bunch of people all over the place. We looked at the map again and found the location for our assigned presentation, and it said it was up 1 floor from where we were. So this time we took the stairs. We found ourselves right where we had been, but everything was shiny and new, updated, and looked like new paint. None of the doors were locked and there was people everywhere. Looking outside onto the street, the hippies were in full frolic. I have no idea where Jacob and I went that day on the elevator, but it was probably a good thing we came back. I was home alone, watching TV. I had it running through the stereo. Suddenly it starts getting louder. I look at the stereo and the volume is counting up. I had it on 12. It's currently on 18, 19, 20. Counting up at a steady pace. I think to myself, fuck, I'm sat on the remote. I raise my arse from side to side to find the remote, but it's not there. 33, 34, 35. The TV is now incredibly loud. I glance to my left just in time to see the remote drop from head height down onto the arm of the sofa. Was out at the barn late summer night, having a smoke in the middle of a pasture of horses. They were all eating. I was exhausted. The reason I was out was that I love the rain, and I could hear thunder in the distance and I loved that sound. The horses were used to it too. I was about halfway through my cigarette when all the horses, and I don't just mean the paddock I was in, but all the outside horses stopped, turned towards the thunder, ears pinned. Each one of them looked enraged, and they just started advancing forwards. They did that for about 10 steps until they either stopped at the fence, and then just stood there in a line. All of them, ears pinned, heads down, ready to kill something. And before I knew it, it was over and they went back to their feeders. Having been around horses all my life, I've never seen that. Can't explain it. At the college I went to, there was an opportunity to spend a weekend at a Buddhist monastery for credit. I was a 20-year-old hippie, so decided to do it. For the record, it's a creepy place, located at an old mental institution actually, and frequently people would hear or see weird things at night, another incitement for me to go. Anyway, when I got there I realized I had forgotten my phone charger, NBD, but of course frustrating. Plus my phone was only half charged, so I just kept it turned off, expect to call my boyfriend a couple of times. So the weekend ends. I am a little disappointed I didn't experience anything paranormal, but had a decent time nonetheless. I get home and charge my phone to discover dozens of weird photos. There must have been over 50, so not just a few potential pocket pics. Most were black, but a good number you could kind of make out weird shapes and what sort of looked like a face. My phone had been off and in my bag the entire time. I am sure no one took it because there was hardly any free/personal time, and when you have to get up at 3 a.m. no one had the energy to pull crap like that, especially not a bunch of college hippies trying to enlighten themselves. Never figured out what happened. Sadly, this was back in 2007 and said phone is long gone. I used to live in Arizona, right between a couple of mountains. One was called Superstition, with the associated rumors you'd expect. The other was Red Mountain, which is a Yavapai Indian holy site, and off limits unless you have a permit. There are a decent amount of stories about ski walkers, and other nasty Native American beasties like the Hoofy to come out of the area. I've always had a fascination with those stories, but was never scared of them. I spent a lot of time wandering around the desert, and was used to seeing all manner of wildlife, including coyotes, mountain lions, javelinas, and various deer. As we frequently did, a couple of friends and I went camping one weekend. We picked a new spot along the Gila River, within close, but legal, distance of Red Mountain. We scouted it out a couple weeks before, and as far as anyone could tell, it was public land and perfectly legal for us to be on. Near the river in a nice clearing free of the ever-present jumping cholla. It was beautiful night, clear, warm, wonderful view of the Milky Way. We could hear frogs down at the river, and the occasional yipping of the local coyote pack. Then, around 3 a.m., everything went quiet. You could almost feel the silence pressing down around you. We throw a couple extra logs on the fire and instinctively huddle around it. Couple minutes go by, then, from across the river, we hear the sound of drums. No one has really ever been able to decide if there were one drums or two, but it sounded like a low, steady heartbeat. The sound abruptly cut off after 10 minutes or so, and we were pretty damned relieved. Then, we noticed the silence was the same. Only this time, it felt like we were being watched. From the other side of the fire, one sound kicks in. It's a snuffling, shuffling sound, exactly like a javelina rooting around for a snack. Now, javelinas are cute little pigs, ranging from 50 to 90 pounds or so. This one was not cute in any sense of the word. He was grizzled, ragged, and huge. At least 4 feet at the shoulder, at least 120 pounds, and his eyes glowed red. I've never seen eyes like that. He seemed to inspect our campsite, and looked at each and every one of us from across the fire. We were being assessed. I don't know for what. Suddenly, a mass of sap lit off in the fire. When the sparks died down, he was gone. Slowly, the normal nighttime sounds started up again, and we passed the rest of the night in relative peace, and booked it out of there first thing in the morning. We never went back to that particular campsite again. It took a couple months before I felt comfortable outside at night. I eventually was able to go hiking on Red Mountain with a Yavapai guide, and we resumed out weekend camping trips. I never saw anything like that javelina again though. When I was a teenager, my best friend and I noticed that whatever room we were in would get foggy when we would have particular discussions. One night we decided to deliberately call up whatever was hanging around. We began our discussion on topics known to have the desired effect. We held this little session out on the front lawn of my friend's house. Shortly, we spotted a cloud of fog far away across the valley. Abruptly, the fog was standing like a wall mere feet away from us. "Look at this," I said, pointing at the ground. "You can see where it terminates in the grass." Then it swept over the both of us. My neck seized up and I couldn't move or speak. I sat there helpless, wondering why my friend wasn't saying anything more. I started to panic, because it felt like I was being drained and beginning to forget who I was. And just like that, it was gone. We were both stone cold sober during this little visit. The strangest thing about the whole experience to me, immediately afterward, me and my friend skulked back into the house and instinctively never spoke of it again. A response to the curious, the subjects we spoke of that seemed to cause these visitations was garden variety teenage science fiction nerd stuff, alternate dimensions and such. You know, the sort of subject matter that immediately lessens your credibility and makes everyone assume you are high. I have had a couple of other odd experiences in my time, but those occurred to me alone and can be dismissed as a subjective hallucination. One experience that puzzled me for years I was finally able to identify as a migraine halo. This particular experience was frightening and I chose not to mess with whatever it was. I did see this characteristic fog again and I stayed the hell away from it. It was not evil or demonic, just indifferent and powerful. It checked us out and left. I cannot begin to say what the hell it was. For the record, I am science-minded and do not believe in ghosts or the afterlife. But I also believe that human science presents an extremely limited picture of the world we live in, so let's not jump to conclusions. Some years ago, me and my brother were watching TV, Galileo, a show on German TV. Advertisement break came on and I was about to leave the room during a car ad I knew. I don't remember the brand, it showed a normal car hidden beneath the body of a race car. Suddenly the picture became grainy, accompanied by white noise audio, while the image morphed to show what looked like a very convincing alien. It had a cone-shaped head with no apparent neck, the screen cut off just below what looked like the upper end of a shirt. Its skin was covered with thick green fur. It slowly turned its face towards camera, I could see 2 eyes and a mouth. It then bellowed a few noises to the side and the image morphed back to show the end of the car ad. My brother confirmed he'd seen it as well. It wasn't part of the original car ad, and as far as we could tell it also wasn't part of some viral campaign. We never found any mention of it anywhere. When I was about 10 I decided to rearrange some of my bedroom. That night as I lay in bed I saw an eerie shadow on the ceiling. It was an attic room with a sloping ceiling, that I swear to God looked exactly like the outline of a Victorian man holding a lantern. He had an old-fashioned hat on, and I remember even his coat collar being clear. Well, I was completely freaked out, but I did understand that shadows are caused by objects blocking light, etc. So in order to calm myself down I tried to find the source of the shadow. Well, I moved some things, and tried all sorts to change the light coming in from the window, and I could not for the life of me alter this shadow in any way. Still freaked out I hid under the covers, always the safest place, and eventually went to sleep. I figured it was my active imagination, but the next night, same again. The following day I put my bedroom back the way it was, greater than yes, I guess it was probably something to do with the shadows of the furniture somehow. But it's the fact I couldn't make it change at all. I know this won't go anywhere, but 6th grade was a messed up time in my life. My best friend would tell me he was a wizard. At first I scoffed it off, it was middle school, people made stuff up all the time. He told me he had a mastery of snow and ice and could lower air temperature. He also told me he could visit people in their dreams. One day at the end of the day I asked him to prove it. We were all crowded around the door waiting for the bell to ring when in something like 2 to 3 seconds the air temperature dropped about 20 degrees. I started to freak out and ask everyone if they felt how cold it was. They were all hugging themselves. I was really freaked out. I thought about it for the rest of the week, I'm sure. Another instance was I dreamed I was a NASCAR driver and I saw my friend in the crowd. I woke up and went to school, and before I had said a word to him he asked me if I enjoyed being in the race. Another period of freak out, and I distanced myself from him for a while. His dream visits continued to freak me out. I didn't like the idea that even my own brain wasn't safe. Eventually I told him I didn't want to be his friend anymore because I was not comfortable around him anymore. I asked him to stop visiting my dreams. He did. He later told me he gave up messing with magic. We became friends again slowly. He later would switch schools, but I remember that in 8th grade I was on the bench during one of my basketball games and I was speaking with my friend when his name came up in casual conversation. My friend told me a story about when the first friend touched his arm and it went numb and became cold to the touch. Anyway, I have never been able to explain this. Probably never will. In 1998 I was at a casino in Atlantic City, and won a few times on a slot machine. I cashed out, and put all the quarters, remember when the machines gave out quarters? In my cargo shorts pockets, just because it was funny. I walked across the street to a different casino, carrying the empty coin cup from the first place. I got to the cashier's window, put all the quarters into the cup, from a different casino. Remember, this cup was a different size and shape from the cups the casino I'm in uses, and put the cup on the counter. The cashier looks at the cup, doesn't touch it, then removes 3 quarters from the cup, picks it up, and empties it into the sorter, smiling at me the whole time. There was $90 in the cup. How did she know there was 3 quarters too many for an even $10 amount? She never touched the cup until she took the quarters out. The counter was a solid marble top with no scale in it. The cup was a different size and shape from the one she uses all the time. I was so amazed, I didn't ask her how she did it. I had just arrived at a crowded frat party back in college in a large, old frat house with some friends from the dorms. I was leaning against the doorframe of an empty room chatting with one of my friends and waiting for a turn on the beer pong table only a few feet away where dozens of college kids were mingling. In the empty room there was another regulation-sized ping pong table with cups filled with water set up at both ends for playing beer pong, but since the room was smaller no one really used the table since it was so cramped in the little room. As my friend and I were chatting, all of the cups on both sides of the table fell to the floor, spilling all of their water. We thought that maybe there was someone hiding under the pong table just fooling around and bumped the table, causing the cups to spill. As we looked around the room to see what caused the cups to fall, the entire pong table flipped onto its side and crashed into the wall about a foot off the ground, as if some huge person got pissed and threw the table. Other than my friend and me standing in the doorway, the room was completely empty and nothing was attached to the pong table, like rope, string or something that someone could have possibly used to manipulate the table. I didn't see any mist forms, feel eerily cold, or have any weird or negative feelings that people say they feel when a ghost or spirit is present. We were the only 2 people at that huge party to actually see what happened, but everyone heard the crash. After explaining to the president of the frat what had happened, he didn't seem fazed at all. Turns out creepy shit like that happened a decent amount at that house, although it was usually little stuff like doors opening/closing or small objects being misplaced or knocked to the floor. I'd like to think I'm a rational person. I never believed in the paranormal before that had happened, but to this day I have absolutely no explanation for what I had seen. 2 summers ago. West coast of Ireland. My family, a bunch of Americans, led by my crazy old man, are rushing to see the famous Cliffs of Moher before sundown. We arrive at the Cliffs of Moher around approximately midnight, lol, and of course, the national park is closed. There is only one other, abandoned, vehicle at the far end of the parking lot. Naturally, Dad decides we're going to see these cliffs no matter what. So, 4 of us, my dad, myself, and 2 of my brothers, hop over the gate and begin our ascent. We crack some jokes about the Guarda coming to arrest us as we do. We can hear the waves of the Atlantic Ocean crashing up against the cliffs, but we can't see much at all. The only light is that of the moon and the stars. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to or seen the Cliffs of Moher, but they're actually a pretty cool thing. There's a big set of stone stairs leading up to a ridge that overlooks them. At the peak of this ridge, I see an old medieval-looking tower. I'm a little loopy from sitting in a packed minibus for several hours of driving, so I pretend I'm a Viking storming the castle. I start gallivanting up the stairs, probably causing a ruckus as I go, and I start to get away from the others. Finally, I get to a point where I need to take a breather, and I look to my left to hopefully get some sort of view of the water. But there, looking out over the sea, is a woman, mid-20s I'd say, dressed in dark, but modern clothes. And she's just standing there, staring at the horizon. I froze. I don't make a sound. She turns around and looks at me. I can't make out her features, but she doesn't seem friendly or happy to see me. Maybe 10 seconds pass. I hear my family members coming up the steps. The girl turns and just guns it down the stairs. She's at the point where my family is, and just runs right past them, ignoring my dad's jovial hello. She runs all the way to her car, the one parked at the far end of the lot, apparently, and speeds away. That's it. She's gone. Weirder thing was that we came back the next day, when it was light, and I went to where she was standing. In the stone, there was a little image drawn, could have been a fleur-de-lis or maybe a face. Something symbolic, but I'll never know. So we began to speculate. Was she a jumper about to commit herself to the sea? Was she tossing ashes over the cliff? Was it a true-to-form banshee? All I know is that it kinda scared the shit out of me. I still can't explain what the hell this was. I was 12, it was sometime in October 2002. I played softball as a kid, which dragged on from the summers into Sundays of fall. Oftentimes, my softball games were in Newburgh, an hour-long drive from Portland, my hometown. My dad would often drive me at 7 a.m. in order to make it on time. We always drove down to Wilsonville and then took Wilsonville Road to Newburgh, to beat traffic. One morning we were driving along the road, an extremely familiar path at this point, and emerged through a grove of trees/forest into fields and orchards. It was 7:40 a.m. or so, overcast day and a chilly morning. There weren't any cars on the road but ours. At the edge of the grove, my dad and I saw a man cross the road from right to left and stepped out into our lane. He was dressed in jeans and a red flannel shirt. He looked like a farmer. Dad slammed on the brakes and I threw my hands on the dash, lowering my head in preparation of the hit. When I looked up a fraction of a second later, there was no one in the road. My dad had this blank look on his face, and didn't say a damn word about it, even though he stopped the car. We sat there in the road for a minute or two, looking for this person, before he drove off. We didn't hit anybody. There was no one there. I asked what had happened, but he said nothing for the rest of the trip. I know there's no way a person could have run off the road on either side. To the right was a steep uphill embankment that led to a shallower hill. It was a bit of a climb to get up there. We would have seen his scramble. To the left was a steep downhill embankment leading to a couple houses and covered in thick ivy and ferns. The person would have had to run across the road and somehow shimmy down the bluff all in half a second. There's no way. I asked my dad about it today, and he says it was a tree stump. Yeah, Dad, I can't explain it, either. I live in a fairly small area, like 700-person town, and a 30+ min drive to the nearest fast food establishment. This is a rather rural location in northern Michigan. This took place in the fall of 2009. I was 18 at the time. While driving home from a fairly late dinner with my father, we noticed what was presumably my neighbor's son standing in the road 3 blocks from our house. It was quite dark out, close to 11 p.m. Our direct next door neighbors are a bit off. I can't quite explain any one thing that denotes weirdness, but they are just kind of different. The father is 60+ and the kids were in their very early teens or younger. The household rules seem somewhat strict for the children. I am fairly certain a television does not rank among the possessions of their house. They are somewhat evasive if you ever try to speak to any member of the family, and they quickly depart to avoid any further conversation. Weird but not excessively unnatural in any way. So, standing in the middle of a dark road, we see what we believe to be one of their boys. The only discernible piece of clothing from the distance we were at was a gray hooded sweatshirt. The individual looked oddly shaped, but at a distance with poor lighting, who can tell for sure? Since we were only a few blocks away from our house, we were not traveling very fast, and as we slowly approached the person standing in the road, he dropped onto all 4 limbs and waddled into their yard in a somewhat noteworthy manner. Both myself and my father were somewhat stunned by seeing this odd child hanging around in the middle of the night. We kind of brush it off as, my God, what the hell is with those people, and pull up into our yard directly in front of our house. After leaving the car and making it into the house, I make directly for my computer and sit down to begin logging into TeamSpeak and my online game of choice for the night. A quick interlude to describe my computer area. It is in the living room, and a rather long one at that. My computer is directly in front of a large picture window pointing towards the road at the back of our house. When I sit at my computer, I would be staring directly out this window if not for the monitor being in the way. The other large window in our living room is half a house away to my right. While it is in the same room, I did mention this room is long, it is also 90 degrees off of my standard focal point. Someone looking in the window can see me directly sitting at my computer due to no large furniture being in the way. This window is also about 8 feet off the ground outside. As I am loading up my various programs on my computer, I hear my dad walk into the living room from my left and just stop dead in his tracks. I think nothing of it for about 15 seconds, but when he does not move an inch, I turn to face him and see his face rather pale with a puzzled look. I ask him what wrong, and he points in the direction that is now directly behind me, the window on the other side of the room. As I turn, I catch a glimpse of something whose presence I feel as if I will never truly be able to forget, while at the same time I cannot exactly detail what I saw. It was a thing that stood somewhat near the middle of the window, so at or above 8 feet tall. With rough and almost dog-like facial features, the like of which I have never experienced before. This thing is also wearing what looks to be the same gray hooded sweatshirt from before with a hood up over its head. The snout, however, was still protruding from the clothing. Within a split second of me turning around to face it, this thing turned and dropped down onto 4 limbs. It quite literally began to sprint down the street. Within a moment of this thing darting away, I ran myself to the window in order to get another glimpse, but it was incredibly fast. I am by no means an athlete, but I am not particularly unfit. The time it takes me to cover the length of my yard on the street while running on foot would be somewhere around 30 seconds. This thing had done it on 4 legs in less than 10. By this point in time, I was scared shitless. Both my heart and my stomach felt as if they were lying on the floor in front of me. My father, on the other hand, was quite intrigued after the initial shock had passed. By the time it had run out of sight, his jacket was back on and he was running out to the car with a flashlight and camera to go see if he could get another look. I myself was somewhat paralyzed. After my shock, I quickly ran to close every curtain, lock every door, and turn on every single light in the house. Being alone was not helping much. Despite being an 18-year-old male, I felt as if I was a 5-year-old girl who had just seen the boogeyman. In the subsequent minutes, I managed to get back onto TeamSpeak and relay some of the recent events to some longtime friends who to this day will recount the absolute fear that was in my voice after hearing the tale. That, however, is not the end. Within about 30 minutes, my dad had returned in an almost disappointed fashion that he was not able to catch whatever it was that had been standing in our window just a short time before. I was almost angry with him that he would even want that thing to return. By that point it was just complete fear speaking though. I was visibly shaken and quite confused. Later that night I received a rather unsettling phone call from my mother. She lived in a different town and was in no way aware of the events that had occurred yet. She called up in a rather scared manner saying that she had just seen a local breaking news story while lying in bed. Apparently there were 2 sightings of what was reported as the wolfman near my town that evening. This was just about all I needed to confirm the fact that something very unnatural had really taken place that evening. I have to say I didn't sleep too well that night or the next one. No follow-up stories were ever done by the news, and I have never seen nor heard of any other sightings since that time. I am generally a pretty skeptical person when it comes to supernatural things, but I literally lack any possible explanation for what my father and I saw. So my father and I are traveling to Belize. We have a 3 or 4 hour layover in Miami. I take the chance to rest my eyes a bit. I doze off a bit and have a very realistic dream. In the dream, my father and I get off a plane and are greeted by a grand procession as if we are heads of state. We are ushered into a limo where a driver named Xavier takes us to our destination. Xavier is a loud Spanish speaker with long gray dreadlocks and a spindly beard. It was one of those dreams where you wake up from it and you have to think for a second to realize it was a dream. I remember thinking to myself, wow, weird dream. And then instantly putting it in the back of my mind. Anyways, we get on the plane, make our next connecting flight and arrive in Belmopan. As the plane is taxiing into the port, suddenly the name Xavier pops into my head almost as if someone else had spoken it. And just like that, I know who our cab driver is going to be. There isn't a doubt in my mind. I turn to my dad and say, our cab driver's name is Xavier, and he has great dreads. He gives me a WTF looks and shrugs me off. We get off the airplane, get our packs and go to the taxi line. Out from a crowd of people comes a guy with white dreads and a spindly beard. I'm Xavier. You need a ride? He says. Well, not to be predictable, but I saw a couple of UFOs as a kid. When I say that, I mean literally unidentified, that in my recollection I cannot explain it. I fully acknowledge that as a kid, I was not that reliable, but each time I had a corroborating witness. First, I was at an astronomy night at my elementary school. I was 8 or 9. My friend and I were transfixed on a horizontal row of maybe 5 or 6 lights, no beacon lights, moving across the sky. It was relatively slow, slower than I would expect of a plane, faster than a blimp. At some point, it comes to almost a full stop, then goes in the opposite direction at a slightly different angle than it was previously. Both of us starting freaking out from that maneuver. Maybe weirder and more reliable, when I was 11, my father asked me to come out to the backyard and look straight up. It took me a second, but hundreds of feet up, maybe more, very little to scale it besides clouds, I saw a metallic orb. No doubt it was spherical, metallic, and perfectly still. Every now and then you could see clouds moving beyond it, and it was not moving in the slightest. My father says he got the eerie feeling of being watched. I'm not sure about that, but it was weird as hell. Eventually it was just gone. We stared at it for maybe an hour, and at some point I realized it wasn't there or I couldn't see it anymore. I have no explanation to this day. If it was a balloon with a reflective material, it certainly wasn't affected by wind or air currents. This was in 1995 or so. My friends and I walked out of a movie theater in Olympia, Washington, and this well-known homeless guy asks us for change. My friend Luke gave him $1. Luke was wearing a Chairman Mao-style cap, complete with a red star. The homeless dude, Indian Bob, stares at it, and finally screams in a voice like gravel, Chinese? Christians? And grabs his shirt. We nope the f out to there fast. Fast forward to that winter. Poor Indian Bob passes out in a park one night and freezes to death. A raccoon or raccoons ate through his neck. They found his head 100 feet away. There was a story in the paper about it and nobody saw him downtown anymore. He was dead. Until a year later when I'm in Portland, Oregon. I'm at a mall and fucking see him. My friend does, too. He then sees us, walks up to us, and says, "Not with your Chinese friend, are you?" He cackles and walks across the food court and ducking disappears. Like in a comic. Have no idea to this day why Indian Bob would haunt a food court in Portland, but there you go. I have 2 incidents that are a tie at number 1 on my weird parade, and they took place about 5 miles and about 6 years apart. 1, rural south central Idaho, spring night. The hubster and I actually live about 50 miles from there but had dropped the baby at grandma's so we could catch dinner and a movie. We're on our way back to pick baby up, driving up Highway 93 through farm and ranch land. It's not completely deserted, but as it's after midnight it's very quiet. There was a breeze but by no means windy, nice shiny moon, a clear and quiet night in the sticks. We're driving along talking about the movie, about 200 feet from an intersection with a county road when suddenly a hubcap rolls across the road a short distance in front of our truck. It's going at a pretty good clip, doesn't waver or wobble, just appears on the left side of the road and rolls straight across to the right, where it rolls down off the shoulder of the road into the barrow. The hubster was driving and slowed the second he saw it, We look at each other and blurt, "Did you see that?" Our instant, mutual assumption is that there had been a wreck that we somehow hadn't seen, so we hopped out of the truck and started looking around for the wrecked car. There wasn't one. There was nothing in the barrow on either side of the road. No culverts, no ditches or anywhere that anyone could have hidden to play a joke. There was nothing and no one for 50 yards in any direction, and then it was only cows. When husband and I realize there is no explanation of any kind for that hubcap, we are both freaked right the hell out. We wasted no time getting back in the damn truck and GTFO. To this day we both remember it and are creeped right out by the appearance of a lone hubcap that night. 2. Same rural Idaho town about 6 years later. I actually live far away now but am home visiting when I get a call from my sister at about 1:30 a.m. She's had a little too much to drink in the neighboring town, about 15 miles, shouldn't be driving, can I come get her? Sure, I grab my mom's car and head out of town. I drive out to where the town's main street meets Highway 93. At this intersection there were empty fields to my left on both sides of the highway, one house with a big yard on my immediate right, and across the highway and right is a big tilled field with a small potato storage building in it. There's a traffic light there that blinks yellow for north/southbound, through, traffic and blinks red for east/west. As I pull up and stop at the blinking red light preparing to turn right, I notice a large, intense light across the highway in the spud field, moving out from behind the building. The light appears to be coming from above and is moving in a sweeping motion, as if it's searching for someone in the field. My immediate assumption is that there had been another inmate escape from the county jail. There had been a rash of these. It was a clear, bitterly cold night and I was like, damn, how did I get so close without seeing the search helicopter's running lights? Dad was a pilot, some things are ingrained, so like any idiot that believes there's an escaped convict on the loose, I roll down the stupid window and crane my head out to get a look at the chopper. The thing is, I still didn't see a helicopter and I didn't hear it, either. If there was an aircraft of any sort in that field with a light suspended from it, it was utterly invisible and completely soundless. I would have been less than 30 yards from it at the point where I first saw it, and I know for a fact I would have heard a helicopter even with the windows up at that range. I just froze there for a minute, absolutely dumbfounded, watching the supremely bright search-type light sweep its way into the next field. Then I pulled my head out of my butt, made the right turn and tore that car right down the highway, keeping one eye on the sky. After I collected my sister I told her what I'd seen. She told me she thought she wasn't the only one who'd been drinking. The next day I told her about it again, and this time she believed me. I took an alternate route to get us back to Mom's, by the way. It was years before I could bring myself to drive out that way in the dark again. This whole thing happened less than 5 miles straight down the road from where the first incident happened. My stepdad has a story that always freaks me out. A little background, it gets so cold here in North Dakota that our dorms are connected by tunnels so that in the winter we don't have to walk as far in the stifling cold, we can just walk through a network of heated tunnels. Anyway, my stepdad went to the same university that I'm attending now. He says that on some nights he would have to work the graveyard shift at the service help desk. At about 1 a.m. one cold, lonely evening during finals week, a couple of students come stumbling through the doors. My stepdad briefly acknowledges them, and the students continue to walk in the direction of the tunnels. A minute later they come running out screaming, Dude! You've gotta come quick. There's some girl in the tunnel with no legs." My dad has no idea what to think, but he follows these guys to the tunnels. Sure enough, there's a girl staring off into space. She had no legs, she was floating there. She disappeared after about a minute. My stepdad loves telling that story. There's a very well-known report at my school of a girl who was walking back to her dorm, slipped on some ice, broke her leg, and froze to death 6 feet from the entrance of her dorm. This was before the tunnels were built, around 1968 or 69 I think. My boyfriend lived in the dorm that the girl supposedly lived in, and I always hated walking back to his dorm at like 2 in the morning. I was afraid she would pop out of nowhere.